to the Southside Beat. Sorry we weren't here yesterday, but we're making up for it today here on Tuesday. Joining me today, you know him from, you probably listened to The Drive on Steelers Nation Radio with Dale Lawley, our old friend here at DK Pittsburgh Sports, and also his Scouts Eye podcast here on the DK Pittsburgh Sports podcasting network and YouTube channel, Matt Williamson. Matt, what's going on, dude?
Hey, man, how are you? It's going to be fun.
Yeah,
I'm sure I'll see a lot of you at camp here right around the corner, too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're working on that, trying to get all the house stuff situated, but definitely going to be up there. But appreciate everybody who's here watching live. We are going to do Q&A here like near the end, probably save 10 minutes or so at the end for Q&A, but definitely had a few topics that Matt and I wanted to touch on. Just because, I've said it on here before, I think some people really like my chalk talk stuff, but I'm like, hey, listen, Matt knows what he's talking about way more than I do. So I want to get Matt's perspective on some of this stuff because, man, you've obviously studied this game, at a much closer level than I have. And I think the one big thing that a lot of people are concerned about when it comes to this team, obviously, is they wanted, a lot of people wanted different at quarterback, compared to what we were getting last year with Kenny Pickett. Obviously, Mason Rudolph came in, did really well, but that obviously didn't work out. Russell Wilson, he does some things really well that mesh with what Arthur Smith wants to do, like play action and throwing the deep ball. But Matt, there's concern over throwing to the middle of the field. Mm-hmm. That's not necessarily the numbers. I think the numbers are okay, but it's how often or how much he avoids that portion of the field. What are your impressions of how Russ can succeed in this offense?
Yeah. So speaking of training camp, I mean, I did a live show with Dale Lawley every day at camp, and practice was going on as we were on the air. And a big thing then that I kept harping on was, boy, the Steelers need to do more in-breaking routes, more middle of the field throwing. And to Matt Canada's credit, it got better in 2023 than it was before that. It was all go balls like crazy beforehand.
Yeah.
But it still wasn't enough. It still is not something we've seen enough of here. You mentioned the play action stuff, that we never got enough of that.
Yeah.
Now,
it was
you're going to get
22% last year. It was so I think only 5 teams had play action less than the Steelers did last year.
Yeah. It's at the bottom of the league with 100%. And it has been for half a decade or longer. Which, hey, if Ben doesn't like throwing play action, I get it. But when it's all the other guys, I don't want to hear it because they need every little bit they can get. Well, you're going to get play action. You're going to get a wide variety of play action. You're going to get it from under center. You're going to get it from jet motion. You're going to get all sorts of things that way. And I do think that favors Wilson a great deal. And I bring that up because maybe it'll help freeze the linebackers a little bit to, present some more throwing lanes, not just for the bombs down the sideline, but the over the middle of stuff that you talked about.
Yeah.
But real quick, I mean, the problem with Wilson is he doesn't see it. He's short. I mean, it's not that he's afraid, it's he's short, and this has been a problem his whole career. And I don't have them handy, but his best throwing over the middle times were early in his career, often off a bootleg or a rollout where he could get away from the trees. He's not bashful about doing it. It's just he doesn't see it. I mean, Baker Mayfield had these problems. I mean, Bryce Young with Carolina has these problems. There's a reason the Saints invested way more in guards and centers than any team in the league when Drew Brees was there, because he couldn't see. You can't have the pocket collapsing in on you when you're that short.
Yeah, that's a good point to bring up because whenever I think we could all, and I've explained it on here, Big Ben in his early days played that backyard style, wanted to get out of the pocket, but he knew he had to evolve in order to have a longer career, and he was able to do so and become that pocket quarterback because he was 6'5", 240. He had the size to be able to play in the pocket. Like you said, Russ, he's 5'10", 5'11" at best. He doesn't have that size. He can't do that. But you bring up the guards and the centers, and that's a good thing because the Steelers already have a good tandem at guard with Sam Malo and James Daniels.
Yep.
And now they add Zach Frazier to the mix, who they drafted in the 2nd round. So that helps. How much does that make an impact in terms of having good guards and centers when you have a quarterback who isn't built like a traditional quarterback that can play inside the pocket? Obviously, there has to be something. You can't roll them out every single time you want to throw to the middle of the field. because
100%.
then you become predictable, and you know that, okay, well, they're going to be doing this rollout anytime they want to hit that deep post on shallow cross or whatever the concept is that's being called. So how much does that impact if Zach Frazier is able to come in day one, become a really solid center, and that front three up front really becomes a formidable trio?
And I think we could all envision a world where it does. I mean, like you said, the guard tandem to me is the 5th or 6th best guard tandem in the league. And I think Frazier may not be Dermontti Dawson or Mike Webster, but I would be blown away if he's a bust. You know what I mean? Like, I think he'll be a quality starter earlier than later. The Saints, though, are the absolute best example, though. I mean, those short guys really hate immediate pocket squashing pressure. You know, I mean, just those guys going backwards when you're shorter and can't step in your throw, you can't see, the lanes aren't as clear to you, is a real problem. And then you dump it down, or you start rolling out or improving, which Wilson does much less now than he did before. So I do think a lot of people have looked at the center position really since Pouncey and have been, they think it's their God-given right around here to have a Hall of Famer. Great, but there's more to it than just we need an elite center to run the ball and snaps. We know Mason Cole's had a problem with that too. But if you're going to have a short quarterback, he's got to be stout and not let that – he can't be going backwards time and time again, especially on like 3-step drops, that are timing rhythm and you're going backwards. That would be a real problem.
Really quick, I wanted to bring this up because I wanted to get your perspective, because you've seen more of OTAs and minicamp than I have, because, well, I'm in the process of trying to move up there. So now obviously what
I actually have not, full discrepancy.
Really?
Right.
Okay.
Well, they were putting a roof on. We were supposed to do a radio show. They were putting a roof on the facility, so there was nowhere for us to set up. And then my cohort, who Dale, had some medical stuff, so he wasn't able to do it. So it ended up not working out this year, just an odd year. But most years I'm down there for every practice.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, either way, and even then, what you see at OTAs and minicamp, I mean, that's the very beginning of the installation of the offense.
Right.
So even then, like, what you're seeing is literally the offense in its infancy. And so
it's kindergarten,
Right. Yeah. One thing I was thinking here, because when you go through Arthur Smith's, what he's done in the past, what he did in Tennessee, what he's done in Atlanta, it's been all wide zone stuff. That's been predominantly that's his system. It's all wide zone, very, very little gap or man concepts. But down the stretch last year, both Najee and Jalen, as the Steelers begin to run more gap, they both, I think Najee down the stretch, after they fired Matt Canada, it was like a 75% success rate when they ran power or something like that. It was was ridiculous how well Najee was doing. So do you have any kind of feeling that, because we've seen it now with Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay, they used to be predominantly wide zone guys. They've now in recent years switched to more gap. Do you see Arthur Smith even entertaining that, possibly because of the guys he has up front? All 5 guys, maybe even you could say 6 guys, if you include, either Fautano or Dan Moore, whichever tackle is the odd man out. All those guys can pull. They're all athletic enough to do it. Do you see possibly Arthur Smith possibly wanting to throw more gap stuff in there, maybe?
Hopefully. It's certainly something I'm going to have a very strict eye on in training camp, preseason, early in the season. So there's a couple things here to unpack. And total coincidence, I happened to retweet this morning because I saw it from Fantasy Points, who has some great data out there. And over the last 2 years, in zone concept runs, Najee's averaging 4.1 yards a carry. Warren's averaging 3.9. Okay. Man concept runs, Najee's only averaging 3.6 compared to 6.7 for Warren.
Yeah, and his gap numbers are ridiculous.
It's insane. Yeah. And as you mentioned, Arthur Smith was 31st in terms of man concept run rate, where the Steelers were 17th. They were right in the middle.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I expect from Smith is, first off, I'm a fan of the hire overall, and his teams have run the ball in any way, shape, or form well for years, going back to Tennessee.
Yeah.
Now, I think Smith is the perfect example of a really good coordinator that should never been a head coach. and he did some crazy things in Atlanta. He had no one to tell him no. And that to me is where Tomlin steps in. Like, yeah, I understand you like your zone stuff, and that can be the foundation. You know, we could go a little zone heavier. That's fine. Our linemen are good movement players. We don't need them all sitting there being static. They can move as one. But I'm in charge here, and we are not eliminating that gap stuff because, you know, the way a different way of saying of how you were just talking about is they weaponized Broderick Jones last year. I mean, that guy coming around the edge is nasty as could be. Yes. And now they have 5 of them that could be in that neighborhood. It would be a crime to ignore that to me.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, because when you go through, you see how athletic Zach Frazier is coming out. Faltanu, obviously, not just athletic, but his footwork is ridiculous. I remember seeing one rep last year in which he got turned around. Like, he lost the rep. The guy was coming, around the edge. He was, trying to rush wide, and he turned his hips to almost run with him. In which offensive lineman that you lost because because then he can cut inside and your hips are now you're trying to play against your hips. You can't do it. He somehow whipped his right leg back and planted it and somehow just was able to recover. That stuff is not.
I saw that too. It's like a ballerina.
Yes, that is special stuff. And so when you have that kind of athleticism, not to mention Sayamalu, Daniels, those guys are already good enough. And Dan Moore, even for all the people that don't like him, he is athletic enough to be able to pull and do that kind of stuff in the to run those gap concepts. I think it would behoove the Steelers to have more gap stuff. Not necessarily saying they have to be predominantly gap, but shoot, man, the Rams last year under Sean McVay, they ran duo more than any other concept. And
it totally changed.
Look at what Kyron Williams did last year. He was third in the NFL in rushing?
Yep.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like Arthur
and the
Smith,
Rams take a second-round guard, move him into center. He's now the biggest center in the league, and they paid 2 guards. One of them happens to be a former Steeler, and they have a ton of weight between the guards. That was not a McVay thing at all. So you have to adapt.
Yeah, and so I think that's that cat and mouse game, like when we're seeing, because during that stretch where wide zone was becoming so good against all the defenses, that's when Shanahan was doing it, McVay, and you can throw Arthur Smith in there in 2019 and 2020 when those Titans offenses were ridiculously good, and Derrick Henry had his 2 best seasons under Arthur Smith. Like, you could throw Arthur Smith in that, I know he's not thought of on the same level as offensive minds in the league.
But I don't think you're wrong.
But he was right there, and he ran the same type of wide zone system too. So that's why I'm saying, okay, Arthur Smith, he's not dumb. He knows what's going on. He can see what guys like McVay and Kyle Shanahan are doing. Maybe he does the same thing, especially when you see what happened with the Steelers down the stretch. That leads me into a topic that I wanted to bring up because I was talking about Najee's outside zone stuff. And I always hear this stuff about how Najee can't be a good fit in this offense because it's wide zone. He's not good running outside the tackles. And I actually pulled it up. According to Sports Info Solutions, he is averaging over the past 2 seasons in outside zone carries 4.3 yards per carry, which is above his 3.9. And that is not like, 1 year he ran 4.5 and then the other year he ran 3. No, it was 4.3 in 22 and then 4.3 in 23. So consistently averaged 4.3. So the numbers look good. At least it look a little bit better than his overall career averages. How do you think Najee can fit in that type of offense? And what are also what makes you hesitant about thinking that Najee can thrive in this?
Yeah, I'm a fan. I really love the backfield as a whole, and I even will throw Cordell Patterson in there as a nice third. I think he has some usage as well. I think Warren's the better player, but I don't know that Warren could do what Najee is, and I don't know Najee could do what Warren does. They're not oil and water, but I mean, I do think there is some overlap, which is great. But I do think Warren's a better player. I think Najee's actually coming off his best season as a pro, and I think that Warren helped that. He didn't wear it down. I think that there is some reasoning behind him trimming down a little bit, though, and he had a lot more explosive runs. Had a higher explosive run percentage this past year than in other seasons, but his explosive runs aren't the same as Jamal Charles or Chris Johnson. Barry Sanders. You know what I mean? Like his explosive runs are 10 to 20. They're not take it to the house from your own 20. I mean, and I know that's always going to be a key. So I do think volume is very important for him. I think he's an untapped resource as a receiver. I mean, I should remember this, but I don't know if you were around a lot during Najee's rookie year at camp. He has this huge catching radius, and before it was dump down city, they were using him like Lev Bell. He's catching balls way away from his frame, over his head, contorting, and we have not seen any of that since. Now, I do think Warren's the better receiver, but I would like to tap more into Najee as a route runner. That being said, I do think he has a somewhat low ceiling compared to the best backs in the league. You know what I mean? And why I have some hesitation about his zone numbers. And I mean, this guy was a top recruit in the country and he played at Bama. I mean, he's done everything well before he got to Pittsburgh, of course, but he just isn't super prototypical when you're looking at outside zone runners in terms of patience, let things develop, foot in the ground, boom, explosion. He just isn't that type of athlete, explosive wise.
So that's the one thing, because, there were a couple of different times last year where we saw that from Najee and Jalen both. When they started running Zorro, when they had Allen Robinson run as that guy, he would go in motion and then he would cut back and go like to the play side. I think about the run against
Which is
Seattle.
a concept they stole off the Rams.
Right.
After they played.
Yeah.
You're talking about those.
So,
right.
So like, but Najee runs that. And obviously the primary aiming point is on the backside of the play side tight end, and then that's where you're running. Then you have to read what the linebackers are doing, and he reads that perfectly on that run against Seattle. And so you see the vision there, you see it there. And then with Jalen, like in the run against the Rams, absolutely did it very, very well. And Sayamalu gets all the credit for having two phenomenal blocks that helped spring Jalen free. Jalen is more of a foot in the ground and go guy. So that does make you think like, okay, he could really thrive in a wide zone system. But as you mentioned before, right. Yeah. So like but at the same time, his numbers so far, while the Steelers have been predominantly outside zone under Canada, his zone numbers haven't been very good. Why do you think that is?
I don't have a great answer for that. I mean, I wonder. The low-hanging fruit is throwing the old offensive coordinator under the bus, and
I think that's legitimate, though.
I don't think it's wrong. I mean, I gladly. Hey, he's a human being. I felt bad for him, but I thought he was poor at his job. That's for sure. And the real tape nerds, the guys that really break down the all-22, thought the run game had a lot of tells. That the world knew things were coming to, and particularly some of the outside zone stuff. Well, they always run it in this situation from this formation. We know it's coming. I really don't think we've seen the best of either ball carrier, possibly, assuming health and everything, or in a situation where they could really thrive. And another small example. Again, I don't think Matt Canada was good at his job, but like if you look at George Pickens' numbers versus man, he's great. He's like at the bottom of the league versus zone. Now, he needs to develop that, but that's also give me some cover 2 beaters, coach. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not one of those things where you're going to always rely, because the other thing you have to take into account there is that a lot of those coverages are going to be deployed because of what the Steelers like to do in the run game. And it's a lot easier to stop the run. I mean, sure, you can get into those defenses, just can get into those too high shell situations, and that helps them prevent, obviously, get more guys in the box if they want to and stop the run. And then, again, you need cover 2 beaters, and especially when you have George Pickens, and you always have a safety over the top when a guy's in cover, when the defense is in cover 2. So it's, you need some sort of concepts you can dial up, whether it's play action, whatever it is. And I do think that the coordinator fault there, it's warranted to a certain extent. But at the same time, I try to say here that there's usually truth to every little statement that's out there. It's the same thing when we talk about the Kenny Pickett flaws, and some people want to say that, well, Kenny Pickett didn't grow because of who his offensive coordinator was. I'm like, well, no, there were still there that Kenny just didn't take advantage of. I mean, even nobody bats nobody goes over, and then nobody bats 1,000 either. So, Matt Canada definitely drew up some stuff that were there sometimes, and Kenny just missed throws.
Along those lines, just to throw one thing out there, I do think we were robbed. I'm not defending Pickett or saying they should have hung on to him or any of those things, but we were robbed of never seeing Pickett with a different coordinator for a nice long stretch. I mean, that would have been I would have loved that coaching point, that teaching point, to at least feel better about the evaluation. And real quick, to back to something we were just talking about. So I thought Canada was really poor at dictating coverages and things like that. Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of Shanahan is he keeps you in nickel or base with a fullback, and that's something I've been harping on a lot. Is not only is Arthur Smith much better at Canada than getting defenses to where he wants them, so to speak, but he's also one of the better coordinators in the league at that. You can criticize him of, I had Dejan on my fantasy team, he didn't give him the ball enough. Fine, you criticize that away, but he is good at getting the defense to do what he wants them to do with the use of personnel and movement and motion,
right. And there are different ways to do that. And I wrote about it in one of my Chalk Talks, how Arthur Smith is good at that. I think one of the things last year was, I don't remember, I think it was either, I can't remember what person, I think it was just any 2 tight end sets. Like the Falcons were right near the top of the league in terms of using multiple tight ends. I think that's what.
Very much so. So they had the most yardage of all tight end rooms in the whole league. It wasn't all Pitts and John who combined.
Right. So there's that. But every coordinator has different ways that they do it. Like McVay, like last year, the Rams 11 personnel usage was ridiculous. It was way more than anybody else in the league, because the Rams, like the way McVay wants to do it is McVay's just like, I'm going to make everything look the same pre-snap. Yeah. Good luck guessing what it's going to be, because everything is going to look the same and you have no idea what play is coming at that point. So that's
even along those lines. I mean, just what the Steelers did last year. You mentioned Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson really should be classified the same as Travis Kelce. I mean, in terms of like how you count him, because if you're going to throw out 11 with 3 receivers and get dime, well, he's not going to kill you through the air. You know what I mean? So like they did some good things with him in that regard too. Smith does it more with tight ends, I
was going to say, because Allen Robinson, man, like that dude at times was throwing his nose into the C gap, and you don't find a lot of receivers who like to do that.
Right.
So, really quick before we get to Q&A, just good old gut prediction. Do the Steelers trade for a big time receiver?
Yes, but I don't think it'll be Ayuk. I think it'll be, I guess the best way to put it is I don't think the first round pick next year is on the table, and it wouldn't be for me.
I don't think so either. No.
Yeah, like I think that is off limits considering you don't have a quarterback under contract at the moment.
Yep.
So if it's a Lockett or Sutton, it's not the most exciting name in the world, but an obvious upgrade for a 4th, or maybe you can. I think there's a couple guys on the team that could get traded. Dan Moore, Herbig. I mean, you all of a sudden have too many guards. Maybe you could make something like that happen. But to answer your question, I don't think they're done at receiver.
Yeah, I keep wanting to say, like, the longer this goes, like maybe they're satisfied with it, but then the other part of me goes, I just think Omar Khan's that patient.
I do too.
I think he showed that a bit with the Justin Fields.
We've learned enough of that now.
Yeah, especially with the Justin Fields trade, because from the time that he first spoke to Ryan Poles to the time that trade actually went through, it was just several weeks in between that. I think he was willing to wait. He wasn't just going to jump at whatever. He was going to let the situation play out, and those talks ended up paying off, because when Kenny requested trade, it's like, okay, well, I know I've already pretty much had the conversations that I need to have with Chicago, and now I can go get Fields. So. All right, we're gonna go.
I bet he's very frustrating to work trades with, in a good way for the Steelers. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, he will wait you out all day long, like a Pokemon.
That's the one thing that I've said here multiple times, is that I don't think Omar makes a trade unless it's at his asking at what he's willing to give up, and not him acquiescing to what the other team's demanding.
And that's kind of how this team has viewed the world, and I think they're very happy with that for their GM. Ownership. Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna go into some Q&A for Matt here near the end. I've already got some questions lined up, but if you have any, please throw them in the chat. We'll get to as many as possible. We're not going to get to all of them, but I'll try to get to as many. This first one was from Jay earlier. He said, "Hey, Matt, tell me again how you would take Myles Garrett over TJ."
I would. I mean, that is such blasphemy around here, and I 100% understand. And frankly, Garrett has not done his best work against the Steelers, but I also don't think anyone listening has watched as many snaps as Garrett as I have, or as many snaps of Garrett as they have Watt. Now, I mean, we are splitting hairs. And frankly, I would have voted for Watt for the Defensive Player of the Year this last year. I thought he had a better year. I think there's 5 elite edge rushers in the league. Yes. There's these two. There's Nick Bosa. There's Myles Garrett, and Max Crosby is now in that mix as well.
Oh, you mean Micah Parsons?
No, yeah, I forget what I said there, but yeah,
you said Garrett again. Garrett's good, but you can't count him twice.
Can't count him twice, right? But those are the 5. And right. Crosby's now in it. And frankly, if you put them in any order, I wouldn't fight you. They're that good. Yes. But Garrett's 275. you know, I mean, and I love TJ. And I know that he's, stat for stat is slightly better. But the tape is slightly better for the guy from the Browns. So I'm just being as honest as I can. Right. And that's elite players. Yeah. Okay, Matthew. I mean, I lose every credibility point when I say these things, but if you want me to be honest, right.
No, but that's the thing is that, like, that's just the reaction with today nowadays is, you say one thing and that means, I hate the other guy. And it's like, no, that's not what it is.
Yeah, he stinks.
And so, like, whenever I was saying the same thing, like, TJ deserved to win Defensive Player of the Year, any Cleveland fan would hear that and be like, so you're saying Garrett sucks. I'm like, that's not what I'm saying at all. Myles Garrett had a ridiculous season.
Yeah.
And for
TJ had a better year.
Yes. And for as much as, like, we like to criticize how heavily the stat, the pass rush win rate is weighed at Pro Football Focus, it is a stat that at least tells you something. That's telling you that Myles Garrett wins his rep a lot more than anybody else. The problem there is that PFF puts so much stock into winning your rep over actually bringing the quarterback to the ground. And I think that's where the big difference is between where some people are and how they evaluate talent versus other people.
Super Matthew, quick, and I don't love the PFF win rate and all this. I mean, I use it as a tool like everybody else. Yes. And hey, TJ drops into coverage better. He causes fumbles better. Yes. His back of his football card is better. But a lot of his wins are on the upside, on the outside shoulder of the tackle. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Garrett wins in a larger variety of ways. I mean, he'll run through a guard tackle combo in the D gap. You know what I mean? Like, he has a little bit more clubs in his bag.
Right. Matthew asks, hey, Matt, do you see Dan Moore starting week 1 of the season? I don't necessarily mean that means it's a trade. Right. So, like, you think that it's just going to be Jones on the left and Fautano on the right?
I do. And another thing really to watch in camp is what does Moore look like at right tackle, because he's clearly so much more comfortable at left. And I brought his name up several times in trade just because there's 5 to 10 teams that could use a left tackle that's super cheap, that's not going to embarrass himself, that has, starting experience and quite a bit. And I don't even love him as a swing guy if he's really only comfortable on the left. So, hey, these two are better than you. We like them better than you. They have more pedigree than you. You better learn the right, see how it goes. But I would be shocked if I don't think it'll be like last year. No.
Okay. Ben asks, could wide zone be more effective earlier in the year? Now, I'd like just to kind of paint this a little bit before. We've seen the Steelers struggle out of the gate when it comes to running the football the past 2 seasons. And as we know, it's been a predominantly outside zone team. And now we have an offensive coordinator coming in who predominantly uses wide zone. You have a lot of young offensive linemen. I mean, how can it be effective? How could it be, or could it be effective earlier in the year?
I don't quite understand the angle. Start. Yeah, I don't quite understand the angle of the question, but I will say this, that I hope our viewers, our listeners, don't have too high expectations for this offensive line in September. I mean, we know continuity is very important. I mean, talent's great, but knowing the guy next to you, like I've done tons of shows with Wolf, and he'll be like, Tunch and I just grunted at each other, and we didn't even say words, like that stuff's real, and learning the speed of the game. Zone concepts take a lot of reps as well. It's hard to duplicate them in practice. But even like the trap stuff that they were doing and the pulling stuff, I mean, it took a little time to evolve. So I don't know that. I mean, I'm not saying they're going to be bad early on, but I do think the run game, the line as a whole, will keep going up, unless injuries really derail things or I'm misreading the players wrong. But I don't know. Early in the season, I assume he's asking because zone's easier for earlier in the season. I don't know that it is. I just don't have a strong feeling on it.
Well, I think that the main concern there is like, I think, especially if you talk to some offensive linemen, they will say that gap is easier than zone, because zone you have like you're moving immediately to one side. You're not moving necessarily forward at the snap. You're trying to move in unison to one side, and you're all having to do that. And you're as one, and then you're also having to make sure that this guy takes this guy takes that guy, and that you're getting the right guys. Meanwhile, gap is this center knows, okay, dude's over. If I have a guy right over the top of me, that's my guy. And this guard knows no matter what at the snap, unless I'm being told, in an audible or some sort of check that I'm pulling, if this is like some sort of counter or power or whatever it is. And I think that goes into, okay, if this is going to be a predominantly zone team, how is that going to help get this running game starting a little bit better, especially if this offensive line is going to be learning itself. And I think that's the biggest concern there. And I agree with you that it's going to take time, and stuff like PFF coming out and ranking the Steelers offensive line 9th in the league yesterday. I think it was like, that's not going to quell the expectations. That's only going to make the expectations rise. And if this team gets off to a really rocky start with running the football, then I think the world's going to come to an end, because when you look at the second half of the schedule, how brutal it is. Yeah. They need to get off to the best start they could possibly get off to.
So last thing is, as I often describe it this way, and I thought you did a great job too, but like in a gap scheme, it's a lot more like man-to-man defense in basketball. Wherever that guy goes, I'm going to find him. I'm going to hunt him down.
Yep.
Where, outside zone is like synchronized swimming for 330-pound men. They're not. Yeah, I mean, they all got to do the exact moves as one in the same. I mean, then they all take time.
Yeah. Really quick, Randy asks, Matt, were you as surprised as I was that we only drafted one receiver in 2024?
No. I mean, I didn't expect. This is a big conversation. We have time. I don't mind. I mean, but they obviously took we were just praising Omar. So this is my thought. No one has told me this. And I adore his patience, and I do think he'll eventually get his receiver. But I bet deep down, if you gave Omar true serum, he misread the receiver availability a little. Like, I bet he thought he'd have his guy by now. You know what I mean? And somebody, not necessarily Ayuk, but a true starter in the league. And I think he's been patient and is still testing those waters. And maybe they end up with Lockett or Chris Godwin or somebody like that, or McLaurin or, somebody that'd be great. But I do think he thought he would have a deal in place some way, shape, or form that hasn't come to fruition yet. And in turn, I think it's pretty obvious that they have taken 5 darts and are throwing them at a fan to see what hits. And they're a bunch of number 4s, and they're all going to 4 dogs, 1 bone or 2 bones. So the number of bodies, they have too many already. And they did going into the draft. So the fact that they didn't take 2 didn't shock me. The fact they haven't invested in somebody bigger than they have, I think has shocked me a little, but we still have a month or more than,
We saw this to the point of the receivers. We saw this a bit with Deontay Johnson when he was coming out of college, because Roman Wilson's obviously the receiver that they took. And there's a lot of intrigue around Roman Wilson because of, shoot, man, you just look at the tape and it's just like, okay, this dude can do a lot of things really, really well. The one thing that I think kind of jumps out at anybody is if he's lined up on the outside. Well, first off, he played so much in the slot at Michigan. And so now anybody who's trying to expect that he can come in at the NFL level, which is, I mean, I don't care if you're playing in the Big Ten or the SEC, the NFL is still leagues better than the SEC or the Big Ten. and that Roman Wilson can somehow come in and somehow play on the outside and just immediately figure out how to get better separation. And we saw this with Dejounte when he came out of Toledo.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't an elite separator right away. It took him time, but shoot, by the this time now he's one of the best in the league at doing it. Do you think Roman has that type of ceiling? Do you think Roman can become that type of receiver in which a lot of the measurables are the same between the two guys? Dejounte figured it out in terms of the route running. Can Roman figure it out?
Long way to go. But I mean, I really love his mental makeup, his toughness, his competitiveness, his work ethic, blocking in that Michigan run game, all those type of things. So it won't be for lack of effort without question. Now, it's just a lofty comparison because I do think Dejounte is one of the best route runners in the league.
I agree.
And is a man coverage beater. I mean, this to me is much more of a man coverage conversation than zone, for Wilson's development. And I mean, the year I was with the Browns, the biggest thing I'll take away maybe from my scouting career there was the defensive back coaches and the receiver coach said, watch every snap, no matter what, of press man coverage for corners and receivers at the college level. And some of them you might find 6, or 12, and it's just not the same. And to your point, even at Michigan against Ohio State, it's not the same as playing the Browns or the Ravens or whatever.
Yeah.
So he's going to have work to do there. It's a massive projection. I mean, I'm not saying he can't. I'm just saying if he does, it'll be a home run.
Oh no, 100%. I mean, especially since he was a 3rd round pick, and I mean, granted, I think
he's still be a good receiver.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I think the Steelers, not to say easing him in, but starting him off in the slot where he's comfortable, where he will face more guys who are off the ball and not right up in his face. Now, granted, to be fair, if Roman Wilson ever is the other outside guy, Pickens is pressed so much that, I mean, how often do teams, like the Ravens might do it because of how often they run like cover 0 and stuff like that. But how often are teams going to press both receivers on the outside? Because then, unless you're just in a too high shell all the time, you
don't see it in the league that much anymore.
Right.
Yeah, it's not, you're too young for this, but I mean, it's Lester Hayes and Michael Haynes coming up the line of scrimmage, or, Mel Blount, and, it just doesn't happen that much. And something that, this coordinator's better at than the other one is getting a guy like Wilson in motion before the snap,
Yes.
And, getting him his feet moving when the ball is snapped.
Yes. All right. If there's any last questions, I think I saw one in here. I forgot to start while I was in here. Definitely wanted to get one. Okay. Ben asked this. He said, we talk a lot about breakout candidates, and it's easy to love free agent moves when they first come in, but they were released for a reason. Who may underperform their expectations at this point? In terms of free agent, like, because talk about free agent acquisitions, obviously Patrick Queen's the biggest one. But you got breakout candidates too. I think one name that's coming up a lot right now is Calvin Austin, especially because there were so many good things coming out about from OTAs and minicamp, and how much Zach Azzani was praising Calvin, and it's kind of the same thing. He's got a lot of athleticism, a lot of quickness, but he's got to work on the route running, got to find ways to get separation, especially at his size, right? So I would say, to that point, who may underperform expectations for guys who are coming in with high expectations?
Let's stick with Austin super quick, because when they did go out and sign or add all these other dudes, I thought it was an indictment on Austin too. Like, maybe this staff doesn't like him. He's not going to block. He's not going to fit. They maybe throw him in a deal for a 6th or 7th round pick when camp ends. But it does sound like everyone involved has been very impressed, and he's the leader in the clubhouse over Van Jefferson, et cetera, et cetera. That being said, if he didn't get great reviews at minicamp, that would be more of a red flag than me getting excited for him getting, his style of play is at the Senior Bowl, at practice, at minicamp. He needs to be one of the best looking dudes on the field to be an average one when it really matters. You know what I mean? Like, I just think that if there weren't great reviews, I'd be more scared than getting excited for the great reviews. I guess Jackson at corner could certainly underperform. I mean, they seem to have loved him forever and have wanted this guy forever. And if you're a defender of him, I would say the poor guy has gone through a million coaching staffs and a million defenses, and he hasn't been great, but
But is he better than what we would expect Levi Wallace to be or Patrick Peterson was last year when he played outside?
Well, the podcast that came out this morning that I did on DK, the whole second half of it, I talked about, the whole thing was about Steeler pass defense. A lot of it was around pass rush. But a big thing I ended on was their completion percentage was very low, but their yards per completion were very high.
Yep.
And I think one thing they're doing to remedy that is just get faster. You know, I mean, the Petersons and Wallaces are just too slow, you know, so maybe Jackson makes an error here and there, but the back seven is clearly much faster than it was a year ago.
100%. And I think that this is probably the strongest the secondary has looked in a while. Obviously you have Porter. I just did another analysis piece on him here recently. You know, how when we're talking about year two guys who need to break out, you know, Keanu Benton, if he breaks out, how big that is for the defensive line. Porter's almost not even talked about by any of these by anybody because there's already such high expectations based off of what he did as a rookie and how some of his numbers, like talking about more of the analytics and everything like that, align with what Sauce Gardner did as a rookie. And so he's already putting himself into that group of maybe he's already a top 10 corner in the league, or at least top 15 corner in the league, something like that. But then you add that into if Minkah is allowed to be back to playing center field, doing what Minkah does best, because they now have Deshaun Elliott who can play in the box more often. And then like you mentioned, Dante Jackson coming in and his speed and what he's able to do. And I just thinking that it's an upgrade over what they had, then this secondary is probably in the best situation it's been in at least a few seasons.
Let's wrap things up here. But the last thing I want to add to that is I really thought Sutton completed it in that he's going to be a high-end nickel, and he could definitely be a safety valve for you on the outside if injury or Jackson flounders. But really, you only need one of Rush, Trice, or Watts to hit. You know, I mean, people that were counting on them made me crazy. Like, oh, Trice will come back and he'll be great. And they got Rush for nothing. I'm like, there's a reason they didn't pay a lot for these dudes, you know. But if one of those three turns into a player, not just make the team, but like, you know, a contributor. Now think about what you have, you know?
Yeah.
And I bet one of the three does.
I agree that is a good thing to have. And like you said, to your point, bringing Sutton, regardless of any of the off the field issues, it does help round out that secondary. So, Matt, thank you so much for joining today. Really appreciate you coming on. I hope everybody enjoyed this. I just based off the comments, I know everybody has. So cool. We definitely got to have you on again. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. This will be available on podcast here very shortly. And dude, just 3 weeks from tomorrow, training camp. So I'll see you in the field.
See you then, and let's do this again. This was a blast.
All right. Thanks, guys, everybody, for tuning in. We'll catch you guys on the flippity flip. Be back tomorrow.